Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the ranking member. The soft bigotry of low expectation in the 1990s has now evolved in 2021 to hardcore racism. We now have elected officials, black and white, who have no shame, that will state that being black, if you're black and poor, and capable of doing what every other American does to function and progress. Simply, if you're black and poor, progress, success, travel, education, a bank account, visiting this body is not for you. Lieutenant Governor Roberts, today's Democratic Party wants us to believe that your mother's journey from poverty to a son now sitting as a national leader is impossible. They want us to believe that my grandfather's journey from poverty to his son in 1950, getting a PhD, is impossible. Hardcore racism is very simply this. It seems that the Democratic Party thinks it's impossible for poor and black people to get an ID for voting, but it is not even questionable to get a welfare check or public assistance. The next hearing should probably deal with considering welfare IDs as Jim Crow. Lieutenant Governor Robertson, the Atlanta Journal Constitution poll found that 63% of black respondents agreed with requiring voter ID. Why do you think Democrats allege that it's so difficult for black people to get an ID that will suppress their vote?
Microphone. Microphone, Lieutenant Governor.
Sorry. I'll repeat my prior statement. As a Republican, I can't speak for how Democrats think, so I can't actually answer that question. But I can tell you this, for me, what it all boils down to is responsibility. You mentioned something that people often say, the soft bigotry of low expectation. I no longer call that soft bigotry. I call that the hard bigotry of low expectation. I'll go back to my mom. You refer to folks in your past. The way I saw my mom succeed was to be responsible. My mom did not wait on the federal government to feed her children. My mom had a 5th grade education. When my father died, she'd never worked outside the house. She got a job as a custodian to take care of her children. I look at my own life. The more responsible I became as a young man, the more successful I became as a young man. And so I would say this, I can't say how anyone else thinks, but certainly for myself and my party, I believe we all believe it's about responsibility. And ultimately, responsibility drives freedom. Responsibility drives excellence. And I believe in when you talk about voter integrity, you talk about our voting laws and our voting system, responsibility will drive us towards a perfect or nearly perfect voting system where any question of fraud can be purged and whoever wins fairly.
Lieutenant Governor Robertson, thank you for your life, your message. It's a message that all Americans need to hear, particularly our race at this particular time. So thank you so much for that. I yield my remaining time to the gentleman from North Carolina.
I thank the gentleman. Lieutenant Governor Robinson, in your comments, you mentioned that in Vice President Harris's visit to North Carolina just this past week, she visited the Greensboro location, I think, of the Woolworth's lunch counter, famous site of the desegregation conflict. And our mutual friend Clarence Henderson was omitted, even though he's local, he was omitted from that event.
Yes.
I want to ask you about yourself. We hear that this is a lot about Democrats are solicitous of the opportunities for people of color, and Republicans are not, which I think you stand as repudiation of just by your office and what you're doing these days. But has the governor of North Carolina, Democrat Governor Roy Cooper, reached out to you to celebrate your election, your unprecedented election, and integrate you into his administration?
Only once, and me and the governor are diametrically opposed politically, but I can tell you this, I've made this plain, just as in the case with Mr. Henderson and the vice president. I think those are perfect times when we can take a step back and realize our common interests as Americans. Certainly at that moment, I think that would have been a unifying message to have this Republican black man who actually sat at the lunch counter there with the Democratic vice president a woman of color who was the first woman vice president. It would have been a unifying moment for the country. The country could have seen that despite our political differences, we can set those political differences aside to highlight the best of us. And what we were seeing there would have been the best of us. The same way is true in North Carolina. I desperately want to work with our governor in North Carolina. I want to sit down in his office. I want to share my ideas. I want him to share his ideas. And I want us to highlight the best of us, not the worst of us. Oftentimes that's very difficult. In our case, it turns out that the opposite has happened.
Yield back.